because I misdid it last time. Okay, here we go. I am delighted to welcome Dan Koski to speak to us this evening. And I met Dan actually in 2014 when I was on pilgrimage in the Holy Land with some people who were on this call and some others. But I'll tell you a little bit about Dan. He was born and lived in Minnesota in the United States for the first 30 years of his life. He was raised Roman Catholic and converted to the Orthodox Church in his mid-20s and moved to Beit Jala in the Bethlehem district in the West Bank of the Holy Land in 2009 to be with his then fiancée, Sophia, an Arab Orthodox Christian who identifies as Palestinian. During his decade in the Holy Land, he lived, worked and volunteered with the Arab Orthodox parish of Beit Jala of the Jerusalem Patriarchate, the Office of the Chief Secretary of the Jerusalem Patriarchate, the Brotherhood of Saint Savas the Sanctified, and the Jerusalem Ecclesiastical Mission under the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. His employment in both for-profit and non-profit tourism, freelance journalism, and his position with the Tantur Ecumenical Institute afforded him unique opportunities to research, write, and offer guided tours and lectures on the living Orthodox Christian traditions of the Holy Land. Some areas of personal research focus included the tradition of the Greek Orthodox Judean desert monasteries, Palestinian traditions of St. George the Great Martyr, the history of the Arab Orthodox people of the Holy Land, and the historical and present-day impact of the Russian Orthodox presence in the Holy Land, with a particular interest in St. Elizabeth the New Martyr. In 2019, shortly after passing a full decade of residency in the city of Beit Jala, Dan left the Holy Land after exhausting his available options to maintain an Israeli-issued visa while awaiting permanent residency in the occupied Palestinian territories. After briefly residing in Cyprus and Serbia, he relocated to Sibiu, Transylvania in Romania in late 2019 to begin work with the Institute for Ecumenical Research as an administrative staff member, and that's where he joins us from today. His wife Sophia remains in Beit Jala as they await the end of the pandemic. Dan continues to volunteer for the Bethany Orthodox School for Girls under the Russian Ecclesiastical Mission as a fundraiser, has recently completed the coordination of the first English language publication of the life of Monk Hariton, the New Martyr of Kosovo, and is presently the unofficial coordinator and English language proofreader of the first translation of a Greek language publication on the life of Abbot Theodosius of the Greek Orthodox Convent of Bethany. He also volunteered as a regional advisor for a forthcoming faith-based travelogue on the life of St. Mary of Egypt, which should be available from an American publishing house in 2021, so look out for that. Now, as with all our sessions, there'll be the opportunity to ask questions, and I encourage you to put those in the chat box as they occur to you so that you don't forget them, and we'll come back to all of those at the end. I'd like to thank Dan so much for joining us today. I sent him an email completely out of the blue to ask him to do this. And I'm so delighted that he can be with us. And I think you've heard already that he is a real expert on the area, having lived and worshipped and volunteered there for a period of 10 years in the Holy Land. I encourage you to put your Zoom function onto speaker view while Dan is presenting so that you get the full screen experience with the presentation and as few people showing as possible so that it doesn't interfere with the presentation. And then at the end, I will invite us to join back together. But welcome, Dan, again, thank you. And please, I would like to pass over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you for a very warm and welcoming invitation to this lecture series. I'm very excited this lecture series is happening, especially now when all of us need any form of interaction with one another that we can get. I'm less excited that this is my first Zoom lecture and also my first lecture of any sort after a year of relative isolation in my apartment working remotely, as so many of us have. So please bear with me as I learn with you a new form of communication. Listening to my introduction, I almost feel like meeting that person because I don't see myself as that really, just someone that happened to live somewhere for 10 years. I am not an academic researcher and I have no theological training background. This is just simply a part of my life that came into its own, and I will share what I can. I recently read an introduction to an article written by the British author Neil Gaiman, who told a story about a man lost in the woods at night that could not read his prayer book. And so he offered up a prayer to God and said, "Dear God, I cannot read my prayer book, and I know not the words, so I will just read the alphabet, and you can arrange the letters into the words that you need to understand my prayer." This evening, what I can offer is nothing academic, scientific, or theological. It's just simply the alphabet that I know, and you can arrange that as you see fit. So are we going to sing the Troparion, Margaret? Let's begin with that, and then we'll fumble through trying to get the PowerPoint onto the screen.
Thank you, Dan, and well remembered because I had forgotten. So today we are concentrating on the Nativity of Christ as the feast. But in the New Style calendar, and certainly on the Old Style calendar, we haven't quite reached the Nativity. So we thought it would be good to sing the Apologetikion or Troparion for the forefeast, which indeed mentions Bethlehem. So I'm going to share my screen so that you have it on screen. I'm going to sing it in the Byzantine mode 4. O Bethlehem, prepare, Eden is opened up for all, and Ephrathah, take heed, make yourselves ready and prepare. The tree of life has bloomed forth from the Holy Virgin, and from her holy womb, spiritual paradise, wherein is found to grow the divine rescuing tree. And as we eat thereof, we shall all live and shall not die as did Adam. For Christ is born now, to raise the image that had fallen beforehand.
Okay. So let's begin. That's great. All right. Okay. Can everyone see my PowerPoint presentation screen? Wonderful. So the topic of the lecture, the theme I chose was Nativity in Bethlehem from St. Barbara to St. Theodosius on the new calendar. And when I was thinking about how I processed 9 periods of the Nativity in the Holy Land, I did go home on one occasion, but through 10 years, it was not simply just the Feast of the Nativity, but rather this whole period of time. Life in the Holy Land is always adversarial. There is always a struggle, there is always a challenge, but often it's rewarded by individual moments where one can truly feel that they're in a special place, especially if one shares a Christian faith. The period that we're going to be talking about tonight is one that actually encompasses a very wide spread. Only perhaps from Lazarus Saturday to Pascha did I ever feel the same way of that every day there is a blessing. And so I would like to have you join on this journey with me. Again, not as a theological or scientific exercise. Other people better qualified than I am can come after me and do that work, but rather what it was like both as a lay volunteer, someone working within the church, and also as just simply a Christian going about the year on the Orthodox calendar, what it was like to experience this. So to begin our little journey, we need to quickly go through the map of the Holy Land. When I say the Holy Land, for the purposes of this lecture, I am essentially referring to the internationally recognized state of Israel as per 1948 boundaries, and the Palestinian territories, specifically, of course, the West Bank. The West Bank means the West Bank of the Jordan River. And for the purposes of this lecture, we will be focusing on the area that you see here on the right side of the screen, with an area of the northwestern part of Bethlehem district that borders Jerusalem. So if we are to consider what we're talking about in terms of a localized space for most of this hour, Jerusalem is about 25 minutes as the crow flies from Bethlehem. In traffic, it's much worse these days, along with the checkpoints that are constructed along the border between South Jerusalem and Bethlehem. We have Jericho to the northeast of both Jerusalem and Bethlehem, about an hour and a half in the Jordan Valley. And within Bethlehem itself, we have the cities of Beit Jala, Bethlehem, Beit Sahur, running northwest to southeast in continuity. Nowadays, they are essentially one urban metropolis. Then we also will be visiting the monasteries of Mar Saba and Mar Theodosius to the east of Beit Sahur, out in the Judean desert, which essentially starts at the very edge of the city of Beit Sahur. This is a very small area, and I consistently have to remind people when I meet them that I spent 10 years of my life in the Holy Land, and they imagine that I'm some sort of world traveler. That, well, actually, for the most part, I was essentially moving around a period of a location of about 16 square kilometers almost every day for 10 years. The Holy Land is very small geographically, and people tend to stick into one area, as happens in many other parts of the world, but very much so in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. So when we think about impressions of the Nativity, as Orthodox Christians and as Christians of other expressions of our faith, we understand, of course, that Christmas is not the westernized, hallmark, materialistic winter festival that has some vague Christian annotation. That ultimately this is the story of Christ coming, being brought forth from the darkness into the light through the Holy Family, his earthly family, the incarnation, the gift that God has bestowed upon this world. And it's not localized in terms of those who share in it. It is to be something that is universal, and that those who celebrate in the far north of Scandinavia and can enjoy the northern lights and Christmas trees and snow can do so as much as anybody in Australia that is experiencing the Nativity through a heat wave. And of course, also the people of the Holy Land. We also understand, however, that this is very much a celebration that is not just floating in our theology. There is a time and a place in which the birth of Christ did occur. And that, of course, is in the Holy Land in a Levantine Canaanite Semitic culture at the time of King Herod. And all of us who have grown up in the West, all of us who have grown up anywhere, let us say, we have the imagery, of course, of not just Christmas and slaves and Santa Claus, but we also, or our Orthodox iconography, but we also have these very regionalized, localized symbols of the Magi from the East, the shepherds tending sheep, Joseph, the Virgin Mary, the Christ child, in these very dated and localized clothes with the stars, the constellations. As we knew, we can now tell from modern astronomy exactly how the constellations looked. We have the imagery of the barren Holy Land, of the hills of Judea. All of this helps us remember that we do have something that is very tangible that we can attach this most important feast to. And for those of us who go even farther and want to know more about the exact location, we do, of course, have the Church of the Nativity, which, glory be to God, is still with us today as one of the oldest churches that is both continuously functioning and oldest church anywhere in the world, which fortunately has just gone through a major renovation. And for those that have gone to the Holy Land, and for those that have lived in the Holy Land, it's generally considered to be the second most important place of Christian worship after, of course, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Having lived next to the Church of the Nativity for 10 years, seeing it every morning when I woke up from my kitchen, working down the street for several years, bringing groups in on a regular basis, I often felt that despite the fact that if I was to say, if you had one day to go to either Jerusalem or Bethlehem, and you couldn't get to Bethlehem, I would say go to Jerusalem and see the Holy Sepulchre, absolutely. Very often, I discovered that there was an approachability to the Church of the Nativity, that people that were not part of the Orthodox faith, that were not part of the Catholic or the Oriental faiths that share the church, often had. That was not necessarily found in the Holy Sepulchre. There was always more of an attempt to bring in their own individual expressions of Christian faith, I think, in the Church of the Nativity, much more comfortability. And there was always a sense, whereas the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has a very awe-inspiring feel to it. There is something warm and welcoming to the Church of the Nativity that goes beyond just the hospitality of the caretakers and the Palestinian people. And there's always the sense of we want to be in this spot as much as possible to better understand the story of the Nativity. And of course, as Orthodox Christians in the Holy Land, one of the major objectives is to guard this sacred space. We, as pilgrims, when we arrive to the Church of the Nativity and we arrive to the Holy Land, we bring our orthodoxy, we bring our understanding of the general context of the Holy Land that we want to experience. And for those of us that enjoy history, that enjoy travel logs, that perhaps have a bit of the romantic adventurer and traveler in us, we want to believe that the land that we see is going to be something that is somewhat timeless, and that maybe perhaps the saints that we know so well through our hymnography, through our church liturgies, through our own personal journey, and perhaps even Christ himself would recognize. And the imagery that comes from films, from books, from illustrations throughout the centuries, of course, feed into that. And so here we have a late Ottoman era depiction of the Church of the Nativity in the grotto, and we have the tomb of Rachel. This picture with this photograph was probably taken late 19th, early 20th century. I can tell you that it was done in the autumn because there's olives on the trees, and it was done in the morning because of the shadow on the man standing next to the tomb of Rachel. In the background, you can see Beit Jala, and you would be going into Bethlehem if you were to be next to this photographer. However, sometimes when one journeys to Bethlehem, you can find something very similar to what you had hoped to find, such as these Russian pilgrims are discovering being in the same place as that nameless monk in the last image. And one can be comforted, and other times you are met with the present day reality. So if that photographer that took the picture of Rachel's tomb was with us today, from where he was standing, approximately, I would say 50 meters to the south, you would see this instead of the tomb of Rachel on the Bethlehem side. This is an Israeli-built separation barrier that was erected after the Second Intifada. To this day, it still stands. During the 10 years that I was in the Holy Land, I was not much farther than a kilometer away from the church, from the tomb of Rachel at any point. I never went inside and never even saw it because it was on one side of the wall and I was on the other. I could have organized a visit, but it never happened and it never felt quite right. So we do have a timeless land, but we also have a land that is changing with the times as well. And then on top of it, we also have the people of Bethlehem themselves, the people that make it a place that is more than just buildings. The living stones, as those of us who advocate for the continued presence of the Christian community in the Holy Land, we call the living stones. I don't call my wife a living stone as much as I would like to sometime, but we have a great and glorious tradition within the Arab or Rum Orthodox, as they refer to themselves, meaning Roman Orthodox, meaning Byzantine Arab, within Bethlehem district. But even though this is still a major place of pilgrimage and a center of the Christian faith, it is still very much a small town. I may get some curious looks as to this, but if I was to say to someone, what town, what city in the United Kingdom does Bethlehem, Beit Jala, Beit Sahur, what does it feel like when you would go to the UK? What's a comparison? The closest I can come with is I visited Coventry twice. In terms of the size of the town, the sense that there's an old city, that there's a bit of a pilgrimage aspect to it, that it's a place that has some commerce, some industry, but it's still essentially an oversized town. That's the best I can come up with so far in my journeys to the United Kingdom. The people that live there have this international connection, and they've also been a globalized community, not only because of pilgrimage, but also because of immigration to all of the West and the Americas, Australia, virtually everywhere in the world. But it's still a small town. It's still a place that people know one another, and no one is that far disconnected from their neighbor or their relatives, especially in the Christian community. So this is the celebration of Christmas, I think, in December. For the municipality of Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity is right behind the very large Christmas tree, which, by the way, comes from Liverpool. It's an artificial tree, obviously. The story I often tell to give an idea of this contrast between being a sacred space of Christianity and also being a modern town. In the year 2000, when the city of Bethlehem was tasked with making Bethlehem 2000, the 2000th anniversary of the birth of Christ, there had to be a decision of what can we do to celebrate, what's the big thing that we can show the world that we're responsible and do this. I have been informed by several people that were involved in the process that a serious attempt to bring in Mariah Carey, the American pop singer, to sing "I Want to Wish You a Merry Christmas" was considered to be the penultimate example of what Bethlehem could do for 2,000 years of Christianity. And that may seem odd, but it is also a way to understand that this is a living community that is connected to the greater world. And as we can see from the picture of the young Palestinian Christian girl here wearing the very westernized Santa Claus outfit, they are part of this sense that Christmas is also what Christmas has become in the West. We're not simply just celebrating a religious feast, but we've also adapted and taken into our own culture many of the aspects of Christmas that sometimes some consider to have gone a bit off track. And there's no sense that this is unusual in this community. So to quickly look at the Christians of the Christians of Bethlehem, to get an idea for numbers. Very often you just see quick images around this time in Christmas, shots of basically my wife's relatives in the churches of Bethlehem district. You see the scouts, you see people wearing Santa Claus hats, you see Christians in prayer in the church. And there's, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of articles about the declining Christian community. To get an idea of where things are at for the moment, we are essentially looking at about a critical mass of 30,000 Christians in the Bethlehem district, including the southern neighborhood of Jerusalem known as Beit Safafa, which is just immediately opposite of Bethlehem across the military checkpoint into Jerusalem. The overwhelming majority of these Christians identify as Palestinian Arab. There is a small and assimilated Syriac and Armenian community, which speaks both Syriac and Arabic, mostly Arabic. There are also several hundred Russian, Ukrainian, former Soviet Union, East European spouses who have married Palestinian doctors and engineers. most of which are women. When I left, the population of foreign-born male spouses that reside in Bethlehem district probably dropped by about 50%. Most of these individuals would consider themselves to be, in some way, shape, or form, a slight majority, shall we say, attached to the Greek Orthodox Church. The Catholic Church and the Melkite Church is much stronger in the Galilee in terms of numbers. But still to this day, Bethlehem is considered to be very much an Orthodox centered city and community, both in terms of numbers, but also in the sense that it has an active Orthodox parochial life. The communities of Bethlehem, Beit Jala, Beit Sahur maintain the Julian calendar, which is unusual in the Arab world. And they also maintain, along with the Jerusalem parish of Saint Jacob, Mar Yaqub, they maintain the calendar of also maintaining Christmas in January. In Jordan, in Israel, and in isolated parts of the West Bank and Gaza, the Orthodox Christian parishes typically celebrate Christmas in December. In Bethlehem, it's not very practical because of the number of pilgrims that come in from Russia, Serbia, and whatnot. And also just there's a sense that this is a maintaining of Orthodox tradition. Beit Jala and Beit Sahur have the largest number of Christians. The Bethlehem population has largely immigrated or they have migrated to these two cities. We also have the Brotherhood of Saint Savas the Sanctified in the desert and Mar Theodosius Monastery, which are two of the last functioning monastic communities outside the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre. And then we have the Imperial Orthodox Palestinian Society, which is quite active and increasingly so in Bethlehem, which is an example of the growing presence of the resurgence of Russian Orthodoxy in Bethlehem in particular. At the moment, they do not have a representative church in Bethlehem. That might change in the future, but they do have several pilgrims' houses and structures as well. So on the Julian calendar, we have the calendar that I've sort of cherry-picked, if you will, for the affiliated feast days that are of regional significance. So the Nativity fast begins late November. We begin with the Feast of St. Barbara. We then go simultaneously with the Feast of St. John of Damascus, the Feast of St. Savas the Sanctified, the Feast of St. Nicholas. Then we have the Sunday of the Forefathers. We have the Feast of the Nativity, of course, in Bethlehem and Beit Sahur. Then we have Old Calendar New Year. We have Theophany. And then we have, of course, St. Theodosius in late January. And this essentially is what we'll be discussing for the next portion of the lecture. Many people often ask, why is St. Catherine not included in this milieu? That's a very good question, considering how close she is in Sinai to the Holy Land. Part of the issue in Bethlehem is that because the Catholic parish is dedicated to St. Catherine, she has somewhat fallen victim to sectarian imagery, sectarian ideology, that St. Catherine is now sort of a Catholic feast day for the Latin Catholics of Bethlehem. Also, I think more practically speaking, there's just simply too much going on in the Holy Land during this time of the year. We are human beings, we have work to do. For cultural celebrations, we can only take on so much. And I just think that as much as people do love her, that she simply just sort of falls short of being of significance in Bethlehem. This icon is one that is found in the Church of St. James, which is adjacent to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the de facto Arab Orthodox parish of the Old City when they don't want to pop into the Holy Sepulchre or go to any of the many monasteries in the Old City. This is typically where people get baptized in Jerusalem as well from the Orthodox Church. St. Barbara, St. Savas, and St. Nicholas are one after the other in this icon, right to left, because Arabs, of course, read right to left. And it sort of captures that sense that, okay, even though we're working towards the Feast of the Nativity, these are the saints that we really hold dear. For those of you that know Arab Orthodox Christians, saints are a very practical utilitarian aspect of the faith. Everyone has their family saint, as we all do, but It's very functional, often tied to monasteries that families are connected to, regions and cities. We're going to get into a few examples of this in just a moment. So let us begin with the Feast of St. Barbara in Aboud, the Upper West Bank. Now I'm cheating a bit by going out of Bethlehem district, but I often use St. Barbara as an example of the local Arab adaptation of saints. St. Barbara has strong ties to Lebanon. The Upper West Bank borders the Lower Galilee. The tradition in this village is that St. Barbara, when she was escaping her pagan father, would come to this village and hide in a cave on the mountaintop. And to this day, there are several Byzantine ruins of what used to be apparently a rather formidable collection of Byzantine monasteries. The cave church of St. Barbara itself is maintained by the parish, which is ironically dedicated to the Feast of the Dormition of the Theotokos, as very often happens in the Arab world, but they still hold the feast day of St. Barbara as the most significant. Whether this tradition is held by pure hagiographical laws as being accurate, whether this was brought down as a localized tradition from Lebanon as people migrated back and forth, the matter is up for debate. What is important is that people genuinely feel a connection to St. Barbara. And so the feast would begin on the 16th. On the eve of the feast, it goes to the 17th. There's a procession from the also very ancient church in the old city up to the hilltop. People light candles. Christians from all the different denominations of this small village arrive there. All of them would have been Orthodox at one point, so it's a family tradition as well. And elsewhere in the Holy Land, within all of the Arab Orthodox world, we have the celebration of St. Barbara that is most marked by the Holiva, the Barbura, that is given at the day of the feast. Pomegranates come into season in the Holy Land in the late autumn. And so people have pomegranates at the start of early winter. It's also symbolic of life itself. And of course, as we enter into periods of fasting, when people come to visit during the cold, dark winter, to have something that is sweet and tasty, that is still fasting. St. Barbara sort of has that tradition in a culture that is very much, that is very much part of the culture of sharing and hospitality, that she essentially is, in all essence, the start of sort of nativity celebrations. So then we move on simultaneously to the village, to the monastery of Mar Saba, St. Sabas the Sanctified, out in the Judean desert. I always struggled having to pick whether I was going to go to Aboud up in the north or to the monastery out in the desert, because the Feast of St. John of Damascus also lands at the same time as the Feast of St. Barbara. Not that the monks of Mar Saba do not love St. Barbara, most of them are Greek, but that it just happens to be that St. John of Damascus's feast day is held. So we have, within a 96-hour period from the vigil of St. John of Damascus until the end of the Feast of St. Nicholas, a nonstop collection of prayers at this most sacred of monasteries. So we have St. Sabas, the anchor, the bulwark of Judean, Byzantine, Orthodox Christianity, one of the most important monasteries in the world. We begin with the Feast of St. John of Damascus on the evening of the 16th. If you were to take a look at where the domes are, the cave of St. John of Damascus, where he did his theological writings, is located underneath the tower and above the domes. The cave itself is incredibly small and incredibly cramped. For those of us that are adjusting to working from home, just think of John of Damascus writing his theological treatises and his hymnography, sitting in a cave that the most comfortable thing you have is basically probably a burlap sack, and you're hoping that you don't hit your head for the 20th time on the stone above. We somehow managed to all get in there for the Feast of St. John of Damascus, and it's an overnight prayer. Absolutely amazing and astounding. To be there during that evening in some ways is one of the most rewarding, I think, being in the Holy Land, where you realize this is where so much of our faith was guided, especially in a period that was past the zenith of Byzantine Christianity in the Holy Land, with St. John of Damascus arriving from the Caliphate of Damascus down to the monastery of St. Sabas. The cave itself can be located under this depiction of the falling asleep of St. John of Damascus. You go down there, it's about the size of a very large janitor's closet. This whole area will be filled up throughout the feast. And people from all over the world that are Orthodox, both from Europe and from the diaspora, arrive to the monastery to partake in the feast for this collection. Some don't even stay for the Nativity because they just have this special connection to the monastery. Then, of course, we move on to the eve of the 17th into the Feast of St. Savas the Sanctified. This is considered to be the feast for essentially anyone that is a monastic in the Holy Land. While the Synod of the Jerusalem Patriarchate is drawn from the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre, the Brotherhood of St. Savas the Sanctified is considered to be the second most important. To get an understanding of the level of significance of the Brotherhood of St. Savas, the tradition in the Jerusalem Patriarchate is that if the Patriarch and all the bishops and metropolitans of the Synod are no longer in the Holy Land for the Feast of the Holy Fire, the responsibility to go into the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre and retrieve the Holy Fire then goes to the abbot of the Brotherhood of Marsaba, who at the present is Father Evdokimos, who is a very humble and holy man who prays that never happens. But nonetheless, we would be very blessed if he was ever chosen to do that. So we have sort of a homecoming of all the monks of the Holy Land who are in the different monasteries, the synods of the bishop. The Patriarch, his Beatitude Theophilus, arrives as well, presides over the Feast of St. Savas, goes into the evening. My brother-in-law is down there in the leather jacket in the lower corner reading in Greek for the chanting that occurs. In this photo, we have an Arab, some Greeks from the mainland, I believe. We have a Russian-Israeli convert to Orthodoxy, and we have a Greek monk there as well, very much personifying what Marsaba is like during this wonderful time when everyone is just simply praying, getting some sleep in the 200-some cells that are spread throughout the monastery, eating a little bit, and then waiting again for communion for the Feast of St. Savas the Sanctified. At present, there are approximately about a dozen monks who live at the monastery, but there is a memory of the time in which the whole valley was filled with monks. And as part of this memory, the 30 to 40 some cells that are in the valley of the Kidron that are opposite the monastery are lit at this one time during this period of the feast. And while unfortunately in the past few years, it's become something of an overcrowded festivity. People arrive that have no interest in the feast itself. They just want to see the monastery out in the desert. And so some floodlights from vehicles have sort of spoiled the view. There's been a little bit of tension between basically the curious and the faithful. But having been there at times at night, seeing the desert sky and seeing these monastery cells lit up, including that of St. Savas the Sanctified, and hearing the nonstop chants, it's one of those things that stays with you for your entire life. The monks believe that the last liturgy will be celebrated before the second coming in the end days at the Brotherhood of Marsaba within the monastery compound. It will be the last place to fall in this world. So there is always a sense that this is the spiritual center of Orthodoxy in the Holy Land, if not the numerical center. And the community of the Brotherhood of Marsaba is particularly helpful with the Arab Orthodox community and guiding them with theology, as well as being something of life coaches to people that need assistance and understanding sometimes that they cannot get in their local parishes. And while it is a very challenging life, to be a monk of Marsaba is something special. You may also notice in the photos that there are no women in these images. That is because the monastery of Marsaba does not allow in women into the monastery. The belief is, just as with Mount Athos, that the Theotokos represents all of womankind in the monastery. To the credit of many of the faithful pilgrims and of those of the Holy Land, many of the women do arrive at night into to the gate of the monastery and spend a good part of the evening there, as well as coming in the morning. The monks are not misogynistic. They are very understanding of the desire to enter the monastery and do what they can from the outside. Also, on occasion, the Tower of Justinian is opened for female pilgrims, though they don't openly advertise it, simply because it can't take that many. So normally, the monastery of St. Sabas includes also the proto-church of St. Nicholas, where the relics of the monks are kept. And so the feast day of St. Nicholas is also important to the monastic tradition of the Sabites. I never stayed for this feast because I had to go back to celebrate in my own parish, the parish of Beit Jala, opposite of Bethlehem, where we celebrated Eid al-Mar Nikola, or in Arabic, the Feast of St. Nicholas, celebrated on December 18th, 19th, as per the old calendar tradition. I arrived to Beit Jala at a period of time when the monastery, the church was just starting to become better known as a place, basically tier 2 pilgrimage for the Holy Land. But for a long time, it was essentially just another localized quiet tradition that kept, and people were often surprised that there was a connection to St. Nicholas in the Holy Land. I can remember giving a tour of people working on sacred space issues, and one individual from Greece couldn't believe that St. Nicholas was here in Bethlehem. And he said, "Are you sure it's not St. Nicholas of somewhere else that's here?" And I had to explain, no, this is the St. Nicholas that was here. And how this came to be is the tradition is that shortly before the Edict of Milan, St. Nicholas as a priest monk or as a simple monk came from Myra Lycia on pilgrimage, arrives to the Holy Land. At that time, there are very few locations in the Holy Land that would be considered to be openly Christian or safe, depending on which narratives you're reading and hearing about. And St. Nicholas decided that he wanted to stay near a place that was close to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and this would be Beit Jala. Beit Jala is located on a hill. It has a very temperate climate, plenty of caves. The sun comes in from the Jordan Valley in the morning, so it warms up during the winter. It cools down much more than Bethlehem or Beit Sahur or Jerusalem at night. So it makes perfect sense that a pilgrim that in an era before guest houses and hotels or even monasteries to stay in would want to stay in a place like this. St. Nicholas stays for a while. He does come back once again before joining the Ecumenical Council, where he went with St. Spiridon. There's all sorts of stories and legends with that. But for the purposes of St. Nicholas in Bethlehem, somehow that tradition was kept alive after his departure. And when he was made a saint, there was enough of a memory of St. Nicholas being there so that the location was turned into a monastic compound. And this existed from probably into sometime into the Ottoman era. We don't know exactly when the Byzantine monastery ended, but we do have traditions that would indicate that there was at least some connection with the Arab Orthodox communities of Beit Jala, that perhaps one or two families which are still in existence in Beit Jala today had the memory of, yes, there was this Byzantine church dedicated to St. Nicholas. One of the priests of the village, in his house in the old city, there is a Byzantine altar in his foyer of his own home that one of his great-great-grandfathers took and put into the house. The story is that there was a lamp that was in the Byzantine monastery that somebody was tending to. And it's sort of seen symbolically as there has always been a Christian presence in this village. And the story of St. Nicholas is very much attached to this. Traditionally, Beit Jala is considered to be the place of biblical Gilo, Jala. There are many different ideas as to where the exact origin of the name is from, but this is one of the most popular. The earliest traditions we have of St. Nicholas in the Holy Land, in Beit Jala, is that when the men were away, either tending to the harvest or with their crops, or out for perhaps a raiding party, whatever it was, a group of raiders came into the village, and they were threatening the women and children. The women and children gather together in the cave of St. Nicholas. They pray. The olive groves of the village, which the city of Beit Jala is well known for, grabs the stones from the ground, and they begin hurling them at the offending parties. They run away in fear. And this is the first of many stories of St. Nicholas in the city. The other images that we see here, which was done by an English iconographer, are of St. Nicholas defending the church in 1948 during the Second Intifada, people having visitations of St. Nicholas. There are many stories of people that are Muslim that have been told in a dream that a man named Nicola, which in the Holy Land usually means they're from Beit Jala, came to them and told them something that was important. Or St. Nicholas himself arrives in person, then they see an icon, which is everywhere in Beit Jala, of St. Nicholas, and they realize who came. These stories are very commonplace in the city. Here is the cave of St. Nicholas, built into the actual rock with obviously stones from the Byzantine structure. We have recently unearthed the original Byzantine floors that are out in and around the compound. The mosaic that you see here is modified, but some of it does date from the 4th or 5th century. The shrine on the right hand of the screen, it includes a relic from the city of Bari. This is an important connection because given the current state of both the Middle East and also of Asia Minor, Turkey, the city of Beit Jala remains one of the last living connections to the life of St. Nicholas. And the people of Beit Jala are very much aware of that and consider themselves to be blessed by St. Nicholas. So typically in Arab Orthodox culture, in the Holy Land, you'll have the stone icon of St. George or the cross, or maybe the Virgin Mary or Christ over the door of the house. Very often in Beit Jala, it's instead an image of St. Nicholas. And as slowly knowledge of St. Nicholas and his connection to Beit Jala increases throughout the Orthodox world, more and more pilgrims are coming. The city itself, the parish is adjusting from this being our secondary church. I was actually married in this church, and that was unusual because most people get married to another church, which has no ancient connotation, but it's just simply the primary church we use. So we're still adjusting to the idea that this is going from being our backup church in Beit Jala to suddenly this is a place of pilgrimage that people want to go visit and very much want to see and to be at. And all sorts of miracles, which are perhaps for another lecture, can be shared. And maybe if we have some time at the end, I'll share one or two. Now, one of the things that's interesting, again, going back to globalization and culture, part of the celebrations during the Feast of Nativity, Christmas, is very much that infusion of Western ideas of Santa Claus and Christmas trees, which come actually from the German and British Protestant communities that were involved in missionaries in the late 19th, early 20th century. So some people that sort of irk at the idea that this indigenous Orthodox culture should be so westernized and internationalized do this. There's very much a sense that, well, actually, we enjoy the fact that we are connected abroad to so many different people. We have family that live in the West. We have traditions that we hold that are very dear and very sacred to the people of Bethlehem, but we also like the fact that the world comes to us wanting Christmas, and we enjoy Christmas just as much as anyone else. So lower center here is my wife's cousin taking part in Christmas festivities in Bethlehem. We have the Scouts with their bagpipes, which again is an inheritance of the British Mandate and also the Jordanian era. All Christian communities in the Holy Land have their own scout troops, with the exception of the evangelical churches, and they have bagpipes and marches. And nobody sees anything unusual with being in the town of St. Nicholas, and yet everyone is celebrating wearing these Santa Claus hats. And in addition, this is also the one time of the year that Christians who are very westernized in terms of their dress don't mind when people show up in these traditional folk costumes for the official presentations. There's actually a society in Bethlehem that does this. It's a connection to the past that's also been lost. That's very interesting from a cultural anthropological perspective. And still to this day, though it may seem odd, here is my old pharmacy down in Beit Jala with just a simple string of lights that you would see in a village anywhere in the world of, yep, the Church of St. Nicholas is right next to us and the Church of the Nativity is across the street, but we still have Western style Christmas ornaments. So we move then to the Sunday of the Forefathers in Beit Sahur. Again, sort of an unusual tradition that even though this is the place where the shepherds arrived, the feast day is not the Feast of the Nativity, but rather the Sunday of the Forefathers, which is next to the Feast of the Nativity. It's part due to the competition between the people of Beit Sahur and the people of Bethlehem, most likely. But the people of Beit Sahur are very proud of the fact that even if their families were not there per se at the time of the Nativity, that they are still the guardians of the sacred place. And most people are aware of the Franciscan Roman Catholic monastery of the Shepherd's Field. The entire area towards the eastern part of the town essentially seems to have been a cluster of Byzantine monasteries. And so what the Franciscans have are the remnants of a Byzantine monastery, most likely. And what the Greek Orthodox Church has is one of probably the proto-churches of the monastery for the place of the shepherds. So the Sunday of the Forefathers is the big feast of Beit Sahur. Many of the people in the village have these Old Testament names, Christian baptismal names as well. So it may seem a little odd that the place so connected to the Christmas story has this as their feast day rather than the Feast of the Nativity, but it does work, and they do know how to celebrate Christmas as well. Then, of course, we move on to the Feast of the Nativity. We have this tremendous structure, which from an architectural point of view is not unique. It is essentially a basilica that one can find in some parts of Italy. There are other archaeological ruins of churches that were essentially laid out the same way. What we're looking at with the Church of the Nativity is built after the Samaritan Revolt, greatly modified, added upon, co-owned by the Franciscans and the Armenians, but the primary basilica is owned and controlled by the Greek Orthodox Church. Recent renovations have done a great deal towards preserving much of the beauty of the church. As I knew it from the start, it was quite a grimy church that had not been unfortunately well maintained, with rotting rafter beams from England, a gift of one of the kings from many centuries gone by. They did their job quite well, but it was time for a change. And now what we see is a much more better preserved church. And the angel mosaic that we see here is the seventh angel that was recently discovered during renovations. Bethlehem is a joint Catholic Orthodox town, so to speak, also Protestant communities. And while the Orthodox are proud of their own heritage in January, they're also proud of the fact that they can participate in the celebrations, both culturally and in support of their Christian brothers and sisters who celebrate in December. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, and the political changes with the expansion and the resurgence of Orthodoxy in Eastern Europe, the Russian Orthodox presence, as well as Serbian, Bulgarian, has greatly increased. And with the demographic decline of Christianity in Europe, the mostly European convents and their supporters have not completely decreased. There is a large amount of pilgrims still coming in from many different Catholic countries in Europe, especially Poland, increasingly more from Brazil, Southeastern Asia, Africa. But slowly the shift has gone from the celebration is really tantamount in December, with secondary January now towards January is once again becoming quite prevalent. Catholics celebrate in Orthodox, Orthodox celebrate Catholic as well. Everyone's livelihood and the well-being of the community is interdependent. So there is a very nice feeling of that we are supporting one another. Our children like to go see Christmas trees. They like seeing the presentations. They like seeing the scout processions. It is a healthy feeling. One aspect that is a bit of a struggle, of course, is the cleaning of Nativity Church. If you follow the news on occasion, in the past, you will have heard of scuffles that occur between the Catholic and Orthodox celebrations in Nativity Church as the church is cleaned. This is an issue regarding the status quo between the Greek Orthodox and the Armenians. In the past, there have been some violent encounters within the church due to conflicts that went from verbal to physical. Fortunately, this has not happened in recent years. I cleaned the Church of the Nativity 3 times, twice when there were difficulties. To the credit of the hierarchs, there have been attempts to make sure that this does not happen again. Now with the new laws in place with the preservation of the Church of the Nativity, I'm not even sure if they still clean in the same way before, but this is also a time that for a church that more or less sort of manages itself with its own staff, this is the one time that the men in the community could come in and do their part to help clean the church. That's the part I choose to remember. So now we enter into the Feast of the Nativity on the Orthodox calendar. The tradition is that the patriarch will arrive from the Patriarchate in Jerusalem to Bethlehem on the old Jerusalem-Hebron road that the Holy Family would have taken. You will see in the illustration on the upper right-hand corner, you will see an arch towards the Church of the Nativity on the path. The image on the upper left-hand corner is the Zarara Arch, which is considered to be the entrance of the old city of Jerusalem and the gate that the Holy Family would have taken, entering to find the place of the manger to stay in for the birth of Christ. An interesting development that has occurred over the last 20 years is that as the Israeli Jerusalem municipality was expanding the road that will link some of the communities south of Jerusalem, they uncovered the Kathisma Church, which is one of, I believe, 7 that celebrated the journey of the Holy Family from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And fortunately, the road was rerouted so that this church, which is, I believe, 8-sided, very unique, only in Caesarea Maritima do we see other examples of this, that we have, while there has been no attempt to rebuild the church, at least it is being preserved. And there was a tradition that the patriarch would stop at the church, at the monastery of Mar Elias, which is adjacent to this location, because there was a memory that there was a shrine somewhere along the road that people would stop at, but it wasn't for certain which one it was. So by default, it just became the feast day. It became the monastery of the prophet Elijah. And now we know exactly where that is. So there's a sense that, okay, oral tradition, cultural memory is to be considered as legitimate very often. So the Feast of the Nativity, of course, it happens Eve of the 6th. Everyone gathers, locals gather. There's a bit of festivity. The big cultural event happens with the lighting of the Christmas tree before both Christmases. There's actually a third Christmas with the Armenians. But the patriarch arrives, there's a procession, there's an afternoon liturgy on the vigil of the feast. Eritreans and Ethiopians are also out in the manger square playing their drums. Russian Orthodox communities are chanting, everyone's waiting to get inside. It's quite remarkable. The feast is an all-night vigil, which culminates, of course, in the morning with communion. It is a wonderful thing to be in. However, I would have to be honest to say, after I did it once or twice, I was ready to go back to my own parish in Beit Jala to celebrate there, as so many Christians choose to, in part because the Church of the Nativity is not really set up for long-term all-night services. The lights are quite bright. There's very few places to actually sit and stand. It is wonderful. It's a blessing. I'm glad I've done that, but it is not all Christians go to the Church of the Nativity. Many choose to simply go to their own parish in Bethlehem, Beit Jala, Beit Sahur instead. but it is a blessing. And of course, the patriarch, it's his obligation to go there every year. So quite the event to go to. So from then on, we have the period after the Nativity, which is surprisingly vacant of traditions that you would find perhaps say in Greece or Romania or Serbia, Carpathians, Russia, all these folk traditions that we hear about in different communities. Not much has survived in Bethlehem. Primarily, the tradition is simply to go visit your family. This happens after Christmas and after Easter. And this is a time where there's a highly ritualized period where we go to the house, we say Masiakam. Excuse me, that's that's the feast of Pascha, excuse me. We greet each other we greet each other with Christ is born, glorify him, and then we share coffee. There is sharing of cookies, sweets, we catch up on family business, and then we go to the next family. And in a system that is based on family and clan, this gets quite extensive. And once again, as you can see from an image of my living room from days gone by, it's very much a westernized tradition where everyone has a Christmas tree. And this may surprise some people, but in certain parts of the West Bank that are less religious in terms of Islam, it's not unheard of for some Muslim families that live next to Christians to say, you know what, that's so wonderful. We'd like to have a Christmas tree too. Our kids love it. So while some people are somewhat mollified by the idea that we have such, again, these Western traditions in the Holy Land, I see a lot of beauty in it. And for someone that has lived between both worlds, it was always a comfort for me to have, yes, it's perfectly fine to have a Christmas tree. And this is now part of Orthodoxy in the Holy Land. And of course, now with the arrival of former Soviet Union immigrants in Israel, we have the New Year Russian tree, sometimes mistakenly referred to as the Christmas tree, even in very Israeli Jewish communities, both in where there's Arab Christians, but also now where there are residents from the former Soviet Union states. Christmas officially ends, of course, with the New Year, the Vasilopita. We cut the cake at the Patriarchate, also at the Church of the Nativity. Everyone should be done. Everyone should have visited people by that time. But still, there's the Feast of Theophany in Jericho. And very often, the pilgrims that come decide to stay through the Feast of Theophany. They go down to the Jordan River. We bless the waters. By then, of course, you're done with your Christmas visits. Your decorations should be down. But there is still a sense that, yes, this is still the winter feast, and we're still celebrating this time of great significance in the Christian faith. And this is another day that people very often take off of work to go down to the pilgrimage in Jericho. The weather's quite warm there as well. Once again, it's a major patronal feast. And there's some connectivity between the idea that we're blessing our houses with the holy water, we're drinking the holy water, and we're just past the Feast of the Nativity. We're still sort of in the surge period of when our lives should be focused on the church. So last, specifically for Bethlehem, the very last day I always felt that was the end of the period of the winter feast that I would, in a great way, refer to as the feast, the festal period of the Nativity was the feast of Saint Theodosius, another one of the great Judean desert monastic saints. This occurs on January 24th on the old calendar. Again, the monastery just located outside of Beit Sahur, run by Father Erotheos, who has been there for many years, now 96 or 97 years old. A few Romanian nuns also care for the church. The connection to the Nativity story is that when Saint Theodosius was establishing his monastery, he took a censer out in the desert, and it began swinging where the place of the cave where the three magi stayed after they had left Bethlehem and were returning to their homes. This is the location that the angel appeared and told them, go in a different direction. And this cave can be seen in these images here. This is a lesser known place of pilgrimage, but still amazing. There is a whole complex underneath the church of different saints, including Saint Theodosius, and of course the cave of the Magi. It's the last day really that I would take off from work, whether it landed on a Sunday or otherwise, because it always felt that, okay, this is the very last time that we really have Nativity and Christmas on our mind. And it was always the way to end this period of time that is so special in the Holy Land. Moment of reflection. The pilgrims are mostly gone. It's locals, some of the monks, a few people that came for the winter, a moment of silence in the cave, and to think of all that has gone by and to realize we are very blessed to be in this special place. So now I'm entering the second year outside of my time in the Holy Land, my second Christmas. And obviously this year, being isolated as we all are, my wife is still in the Holy Land. My thoughts get drawn to this time. And what matters, what didn't matter, of course, are things that I've had opportunities to think about. What I miss from the Holy Land is a relatively modest list, but much of it involves this time of the year. I remember the moments of being there on the feast days, but also the moments where I was asked to mind the donation box as the monks locked up at a monastery, including Nativity Church, and I'm there by myself. I remember the days in the Cave of St. Nicholas on liturgies, and also during the feast itself, when we are praying to St. Nicholas, asking for his guidance and intercession, and really feeling a sense that he is with us. I remember the Christians that are in the Holy Land that may not be the most sophisticated always in terms of their theology of Orthodoxy, and may sometimes confuse culture and nationality and identity with their faith, but still have a faith that is strong and admirable and has brought them through many hardships. And this image that is so often shown during this time of the year, the Christians of the Holy Land, this young Palestinian girl with her hoop earrings and her black nail polish that is praying Catholic style, even though she's probably Orthodox perhaps, at the Church of the Nativity, but praying fervently, asking to get through another year in the Holy Land, asking for the protection of her family. That's what I miss. And my friends, the friends that I met along the way. Here we have the caretaker of the Church of St. Nicholas, Nadal Saman, an absolutely wonderful person I hope you all meet, and Father Evdokimos, the Abbot of Marsaba. Moments together in fellowship for those of us who were not born in the Holy Land, realizing we have family elsewhere in the world, but we are together here as Christians, and we are together in our new land. And those that are fortunate and blessed to call themselves Christians of the Holy Land, the living stones, the keepers of the holy fire, those that Christmas is indeed in their hearts, Nativity is in their hearts, day in and day out, not in the festal sense, but in the spirit of the incarnation. And so with that, I would like to thank you for being part of this lecture. Again, your donations are benefiting the Bethany Orthodox School for Girls, as well as the Taibe Education Fund. Here, one of our greatest patrons is visiting relatives at the Church of Mary Magdalene, where St. Elizabeth Fyodorovna, someone very near and dear to the family, remains, along with Princess Alice. For those of you that have been watching the series of The Crown, you'll know the story behind this. The monastery is connected to our Bethany mission for girls from disadvantaged families. Your donations are especially appreciated during this time when we have no pilgrims and people are asking for help. So having this opportunity to both share my story and also support the school is something I am truly humbled by. And stay in touch. This is my information. I'd like to thank the Institute for Ecumenical Research, which graciously, and perhaps against their better judgment, allowed me to use staff time to prepare this lecture. I have no right to do so, but still they allow me to do this from time to time. Please reciprocate by joining us on Facebook. We're also offering language courses for Ancient Greek, Hebrew, Old Slavonic. We'll be adding some other languages as well. We do this not as a for-profit endeavor, but to increase theological and educational knowledge. Please join us. Also, just to receive our updates and to learn about some of the excellent work in theological research that we're doing. I also have published a few articles on the cultural history of Beit Jala. I will be adding some articles hopefully next year. Stay in touch, ask questions, and thank you and God bless.
Thank you so much, Dan, for a wonderful presentation. And some people have already said in the chat how lovely it was to hear such heartwarming and personal reflections on the Holy Land. And I think also it was great to hear some personal reflections on, you know, attending the all-night service at the Church of the Nativity, and that it's wonderful to do it, but you know, you had your time doing that, and it was great to celebrate the Nativity in the parish church as well. Thought that was incredibly interesting. I think there are some questions in the chat which I will get to, but I'm sure our viewers would love to hear a little more about your connection with the Bethany Orthodox School for Girls. I know we've got Dr. Maria on the call as well, and she's thanked us for also supporting the Taipei and Educational Trust. But if you could tell us a little more about the convent and the school and your connection and how that all came about.
Thank you. The Bethany Convent is attached to the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. At the end of the First World War, when the British came into Jerusalem, by that time, the Russian ecclesiastical mission had basically been in holding. The remnants, which were in East Jerusalem and Bethany, went to the church abroad. And since the 1930s, what used to be a former pilgrimage place in Bethany became a school that was actually founded by two Scottish Anglican converts to the Orthodox faith who had been planning to go to India for missionary work. They stayed in the Holy Land. They became connected to the diaspora Orthodox community that was left in the old city of Jerusalem on Mary Magdalene, and the school was founded. Originally, the idea was to care for sick Arab girls at a time when there was very large families and very little money. They began educating the girls, and suddenly they discovered that the girls wouldn't leave because they wanted more education. They wanted school. In the 1970s, we became a localized community school with a majority Muslim population as the community changed in Bethany. But we maintain a section for the school that is for Palestinian Christian girls and some that are either of mixed former Soviet Union, Ukrainian, Russian, Palestinian, and some purely Russian, Ukrainian that wind up in the Holy Land that need a place that's nurturing, that's safe. Mother Maria, excuse me, I'll go back slide. Mother Maria, which you see on the right of the screen in the monastic habit with our girls, is from Germany. She has been there for several years now as head of the Community of the Resurrection of Christ, taking care of the girls as well as leading the monastic choir at Mary Magdalene. Our mission is to maintain a Christian presence, not just as a compound in Bethany, but also to remind people that Christ is always with us and that our purpose is not simply to be in places of pilgrimage, but to care for those who need help and to serve as examples, both in terms of those who are disadvantaged, but also giving education to Muslim girls who live in the community, that they will not become Christian by evangelism, but they will at least get an education and understand that Christianity has something to offer them as well, if nothing else, but then just the sense that you are welcome at our table. And this is a very powerful thing. The Russian church abroad is not particularly known for having mission schools. This is, I believe, the only functioning one in the region, if not the world. But it very much is connected with the Romanov presence that was so important to the royal family up until the very end of the regime. So it's also in memory of the commitment that the Russian Orthodox Church has to keeping a presence in the Holy Land. So for a lot of reasons, people get involved and join. We need all the support and help that we can get. There are many noble causes, including the school in Taipei, the education fund in Taipei. For those that have a desire to serve in this way, you're always welcome to contact me and to learn more about the school. We've had a very successful fundraising drive this year, and I understand people have been very generous in their donations through this lecture series. I am just as equally grateful that Maria is getting the funds for the Taipei Education Fund. I love Taipei with all my heart. Maria has been up there for many years, God bless her, up in Taipei, helping keep the community going. That is just as important in its own way as Bethany School. So very happy that everyone here has donated as they have.
Thank you. I had an interesting question from Katrina, who has said, what is it that people in Bethlehem and the area hear when they wake up? Is it the Muslim call to prayer, or is it church bells? Or perhaps it's both? I don't know. What is the experience for people day to day?
Well, as someone that lived directly under a mosque for quite a few years, for a year, excuse me, technically, it depends on the time of the year because the call to prayer in Islam occurs with the rising of the sun. So in the summer, you'll typically hear the call to prayer first. From my wife's home on the elevated hill of Beit Jala, you can count the green lights of the mosques. And over the years, I lost track of the number. You can almost see Amman, Jordan, from Beit Jala. There are certainly more mosques than church bells, but the church bells are still there. And there are periods of time, as that happens in Europe, the Muslim call to prayer and questions of tension. Famously, when Pope John Paul II came to Bethlehem, there was an issue of whether or not the mosque in Bethlehem would be willing to forestall the call to prayer out of respect for the Pope. Ultimately, the decision was taken that it would not. That's a moment that is quite sad, unfortunately, but there are also moments where the Muslim community is very pleased and very blessed to have Christians there. And in Hebron, which is a very Islamic community, the Russian monastery of the Holy Trinity, for the first time since the time before the First World War, I believe, the bells were rung for Pascha in this entirely Muslim community. So while you will hear the call to prayer throughout most of the year first before the church bells, you will still hear the church bells. And now I live in a community that there's a church on every neighborhood, essentially. And it is wonderful to hear those church bells. And I certainly do not miss the Muslim call to prayer. But I also sometimes do miss the memory that, okay, if I can hear the call to prayer from the mosque, even though that's not my call to prayer, it's still reminding me that I should do my prayers just as well. So that's the best I can do for that answer. Thank
you. Lots of people interested in the link with St. Nicholas. And of course, St. Nicholas featured earlier in our series of special saints that we visited, and we visited him at Bari. But wonderful to hear that there are relics of him in Beit Jala and to hear the traditions about him. Could you tell us, I don't know how much time we have, but perhaps one or two of the miracles connected with St. Nicholas and Beit Jala?
Well, I will give you, I'll give you one, I think, and we'll see if there's any more time. So on the right screen, we have the shrine, the upper part of the Church of St. Nicholas. Now, during the Second Intifada, Beit Jala, because it's an elevated position, was occupied by the Israeli army shooting into Bethlehem. And unfortunately, there were two cases of very close encounters, or shall we say fortunately, two very close encounters. Once the church was damaged, the wall near this edifice that you see was damaged, and Father George Chauhan, one of the priests who is now with St. Nicholas awaiting the resurrection, God bless him, was responsible to help the workers finish patching up the wall. Now, the lamp above this edifice for some reason was still on. In the entire district of Beit Jala, the generator, the power supply had been hit. No one else had electricity. And the man that was fixing the wall was very nervous. And he said, we need to get home. We should be getting home now. And Father George said, just finish it up. The story goes that the minute the last piece of masonry went through to patch up the wall, the light above the relics of St. Nicholas went out. And that was essentially seen as, okay, St. Nicholas has said, you've protected my church. Now it's time to get home and look after yourself. The other story that is often told is at the same period of conflict, a Palestinian Muslim man was engaged in the militant activity, however you wish to describe it. And as he was positioning himself, an old man came next to him and said, you need to leave. There's going to be a shell that's going to come in very quickly and you're going to die. And the man looked at him and said, who are you? He said, I'm Nicholas from the village. Just trust me. So he moves, and of course, the shell or the rocket lands, and the man is stunned, and he begins asking afterwards, who was this person? Who is this guy named Nicholas? And finally, somebody says, take a look at this icon. And of course, as has happened on several occasions throughout the many years, he says, this is the person that spoke to me. And I was not there to witness it, but it's said that the individual who was Muslim came into the church afterwards. He lit candles and he told the story and he left. And so we consider this as yet another daily example. For the most part, Nicholas keeps a low profile. He knows not to spoil a good thing, but ask anyone in Beit Jala who is Orthodox, and including a good many number of Catholics and otherwise, and everyone has their own story, myself included, of how Nicholas lets himself be known that he is very much a workaday saint. And there's always a bit of a rivalry between Nick and George, because George is in the next valley over, in his monastery where mom and dad grew up, where he lived as well. His relics are closer to Tel Aviv in Lod, but locally we have this tradition that he also lived right next. And there is even a chant that the Orthodox people of Beit Jala give during Holy Week. We say, from St. Nicholas to St. George, we light the way. Some believe that there was actually an underground path to a monastery connected in the village of St. Nicholas, as the village of Beit Jala. Others believe it might just be a connection to how close the feast days usually are. But those two saints essentially very much are a day-to-day part of the life of the people.
Wonderful. I've had a question which was asking, which is the church which had the cave where the Holy Family were resting? Okay,
the church where the cave of the Holy Family. Well, that's actually, are they referring to Mar Theodosius?
Well, yeah, that was the Magi, wasn't it?
Yeah, Magi. Sure. So the cave of the Holy, the Kathisma. Yes, I'm sorry. We have a couple of different locations, but so this is the Byzantine ruins of Kathisma, which are located on the very southern end. There was at one time approximately 7 different chapels and whatnot. In the other church in Beit Jala, we have a stone enclosure that the story is that when the family was hiding from Herod's forces, they were encapsulated in the stone, and that stone eventually became the bishop's seat of Kathisma. But there is no, the stories of the flight into Egypt, we actually have a well in Beit Jala, and I'm still referring to it as we, because, which is, the story is this is the first stop of the water skins that they filled up on their way to Egypt. We don't actually have any cultural traditions simply because there is too much going on. Again, during the Feast of the Nativity, we don't have a regular prayer service there. That may change at some point, but at the moment, we don't, in the Orthodox tradition, we don't really have all that many specific locations with the church built to, this is a spot along the way, the Holy Family. We have these localized traditions, but most of these would have been back in the time of St. Helena, and they slowly disappeared. They're still finding churches to this day in the Holy Land that are from the Madaba map. And the Patriarchate, if you've been following the news, is fighting a battle just to keep some of the properties as is, let alone build new ones. And of course, once you have a place to, even if you have a property in an archaeological site, you have to do certain things in order to build on it. And then you also need the money. It's easy to get money to build a church. It's very difficult to maintain it with the right people as well. But thankfully, we know where many of these locations are, and we have these traditions, and we'll see what's in store in the future.
Yes, and God willing, we can see more built. I think that we haven't got much time left, so if we don't get to everyone's question, I do encourage you to email them to Dan, and as he invited. But there is a short question here, which was about the makeup of the monks at Mar Saba. You said there were perhaps a dozen there living there. So you said there are Greek monks there, but are there local Arab monks as well, Palestinians?
At the moment, to my knowledge, there are no Arab monks. The majority of them are from Greece, either from Greece itself. I believe one is from the diaspora. Since I was last in contact, we have also Brotherhood of Mar Saba has 2 Russian-speaking monks. There's also a monk from Moldova that speaks both Romanian and Russian. And there's also an American convert, sort of the 3 converts in the Holy Land that everyone knows. You've got Mother Xenia at Mary Magdalene from the United States. You've got Monk Justin out in Sinai, and then you've got Father Lazarus with the monks of Mar Saba, who now is actually caretaking the site of St. Theoktistos, which is another Judean desert monastic site. But for the most part, it's Greek. From time to time, some Arab monks do eventually come. The patriarch typically wants them to go abroad, in part because of the family issues that happen. The Palestinian Orthodox communities are very family-centered, and it's very hard for an Arab family, especially to lose a male member of the family, just seen as someone that's going to be a provider, someone that's going to carry on the family name. For the most part, the novices that do come into monasteries, most of them don't last. With the Catholic Church, many sisters are Palestinian or Jordanian. In the Orthodox Church, most of the Palestinian nuns belong to the church abroad, the Russian church abroad. So we have quite a few in Bethany, in Gethsemane, and Mount of Olives. But there are relatively few Arab monks in the Holy Land, maybe 1 or 2. And then we have, I believe, 2 Arab monks on the synod that come from the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that there are some, and we pray that they will increase as well. Dan, thank you so much for your presentation and for being so patient and answering so many questions. Can I invite you just to stop sharing your screen so that we can all have a gallery view again and greet each other and wish each other a very blessed feast of the Nativity, whether you are celebrating on the New Style calendar or the Old Style. Thank you very, very much, Dan, for all your words and for joining us from Romania. And we hope you'll be reunited with your wife, Sophia, very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I've put the link for the charity payments in the chat one more time, just to be on the safe side. But do get in touch with us by email if you're not able to use PayPal. And at the end of the series, we'll let you know what the total is that we were able to donate to each of the charities. Next Monday, we are not taking a break. Even though it's a public holiday in the UK, we will be visiting the Mother of God, whose synaxis we celebrate on the 26th. And we will be visiting the pilgrimage place in this country, the beautiful village of Walsingham. May I recommend, Dan, if you come to the UK again, that you visit Walsingham. There are many similarities with Bethlehem, if on a slightly different scale.
It's on the list to visit.
Thank you.
And to everyone, it was a blessing to be there all those years, but always remember, especially in this time of isolation, Christ is with all of us everywhere that we are. So be well and God bless this nativity, and we'll meet again.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and hope to see you again. Goodbye.